There's an awful lot one could say on the Feast of the Sacred Heart, and probably one shouldn't. But maybe let's just pray today that we may see, understand, realize, grasp that we are loved, that God is, as St. John describes him, God is love. Now, often in this feast, there's reference to the episode from the Passion narrative of St. John, the episode of the piercing of his side and the outflow, the outpouring of blood and water. It was a soldier who pierced the side of Jesus. And in Christian tradition and Christian legend, he has been given a name, Longinus, and all sorts of stories have built up around him. And one of them, it is rather far-fetched, I think it is just fantasy, but it's got a symbolic meaning, is that he was actually blind. Now that seems rather unlikely that you'd have a blind soldier, but at least let's say he was short-sighted. And he thrust with his spear, and some of the blood and the water that came out fell on his eyes, and he began to see. And then he's connected, reasonably enough, with the centurion in the Gospel of Mark, the same scene, who when he sees how Jesus dies says, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." So Longinus sees and believes. And I think ever after, along with John, the beloved disciple, along with Mary and the other women, the Church has been looking at this wound in the side of Christ, looking in, as it were, peering in. It becomes a kind of window, and seeing the heart, seeing the love that is at the heart of Jesus, at the heart of God, that is really the divinity of Christ, we can say. This is the love I mean, says St. John, not our love for God, but God's love for us, when he sent his Son to be the sacrifice which takes our sins away. For many of the theologians and the spiritual writers and so on who've reflected on this scene by the cross, the blood and the water are connected right back to the Garden of Eden. We remember there that there's a spring that comes up from the ground and waters the garden and turns into 4 great rivers that are imagined as watering, irrigating the whole world. And so, says St. Bonaventure, for example, this water spreads through all devout hearts and waters the whole world and makes it fruitful. If only we could see the river of divine love that's flowing in the world all day, every day. It would be so good if we could see that and, as it were, lose our fear of jumping in. But better to swim in the river of divine love than just in your own little plastic swimming pool in your back garden, really. That's it. And there's another lovely thought there from a Russian writer. He says, this blood and water of Jesus that fell into the earth, it, as it were, consecrates the world. It means that the world will never just disappear, never be written off, but will be transfigured. Even in the earth, there is the blood of Christ, the water from the side of Christ. So, let's jump to the first reading. If the Lord set his heart on you, it was not because you outnumbered other peoples. You were the least. It was for love of you. Well, love, they always say, is inexplicable. You were the fewest, the smallest, the least. Similarly, in the Gospel, Jesus says, I thank you for revealing these things, not to the learned and the clever, but to mere children, little children even, infants. Now, in my life, I've known many Jews. There were many in my school, and I always found them intelligent, sensitive, lively, creative people. Now, maybe they become that because they were chosen. But they weren't chosen, Moses says, because of that. They were chosen because they were nobodies, not because they were clever or wise or whatever. When St. Paul looks at the early Christian community, mixture of Jews and Gentiles, he saw the same thing. Consider your own call. Not many of you are wise by human standards, not many influential, not many of noble birth. God chose the weak, he says, the common, the contemptible, those who count for nothing. In the Gospel, Jesus thanks the Father. He talks of his own complete transparency, the complete sort of exchange there was between him, their unity and union. And then surely he must have thrown his arms wide, as they would be thrown wide on the cross, and says, come to me, all you who labour and are overburdened. Now the people of Israel, at least their leaders, had overburdened themselves, had added to the law. But it's not just the Israelites who do that kind of thing, but all of us. I mean, we all love ourselves, but actually this self that we love, we know at the same time that it's our biggest burden. You know, if I've got a problem, it's actually me. And I remember a monk who told this story. The monk is now long dead, but he was a young man, and things had got into a bit of a mess in his life. And but he thought, well, he was a devout Catholic, and he'd go to Mass. And he went to Mass. There was a particular priest he didn't like, and so he thought, well, I'll go to this other church where this priest won't be. And in he went, and who should walk to the altar but this very priest? And in his homily, the priest just said, Mary knew she was a nobody. Mary knew she was a nobody. And this just bowled this young man over. And it suddenly freed him. Well, if Mary knew she was a nobody, then I know I'm a nobody. And that's okay. It was for love of you. God chose you because you were a nobody. I think we find rest when we lay down the tools of our ego, as it were, and just admit we are nothing. So may we see how we are loved. Now, somebody made a very good connection between this gospel that we have today, come to me, all you who labour and are overburdened, and a short story by the American writer Flannery O'Connor. It's a very short story. It's called Revelation, and it's set in a dentist's waiting room in the southern states. And the lady concerned who's in the waiting room is a Christian lady, and she's respectable and she's proper. And there's an incident which kind of throws all that awry. And it's a moment of revelation for her. And this is what she sees. A visionary light settled in her eyes. Think of Longinus. She saw a vast swinging bridge extending upward from the earth through a field of living fire. That's the love of Christ, really. Upon it, a vast horde of souls were rumbling towards heaven. Now, this was written in the 1950s, before things became politically correct. There were whole companies of white trash, clean for the first time in their lives, and bands of Negroes in white robes, and battalions of freaks and lunatics, shouting and clapping and leaping like frogs. And bringing up the end of the procession was a tribe of people whom she recognized at once as those who, like herself and her husband, had always had a little of everything and the God-given wit to use it right. She leaned forward to observe them closer. They were marching behind the others with great dignity, accountable as they had always been for good order and common sense and respectable behavior. They alone were on key, yet she could see by their shocked and altered faces that even their virtues were being burned away. Come to me. When we've seen that we are loved, an awful lot starts to matter an awful lot less. And that is the freedom of the children of God, and that freedom comes to us when we see, like Longinus, that the world is full of the love of God.